I watched The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. The classic spaghetti western was requested by Jay. I'm going to go ahead and say right up front, I did not realize that they were called spaghetti westerns because they were usually made by Italian production studios all around Europe. I also knew that parts were dubbed, but I didn't realize that they actually didn't record audio at all. And then all of the audio was dubbed over, which was kind of crazy, but you get used to it pretty quickly, actually. I have no idea why the dub for this movie was so much better than dubs that we get even now. If you don't believe me, go check out Squid Game dubbed.
You cried and said, "But that's the edge. There's no way I'll go."
Building an egalitarian society.
Anyway, overall, I thought the movie was great. It's really easy to see why it's referenced so much. The music is super famous, and I did not realize it was from this movie. And the 3 hours really just flies by. The movie fits a ton in. The only part that I felt was a little bit weird was the Civil War part, which takes up about half an hour in the third act. But beyond that, everything else went pretty quickly, was very relevant to the characters and the plot, and the movie really fits a lot in. Even the title is pretty self-explanatory, but you figure it out in the first scene with each character that you have. The good is obviously Clint Eastwood, and that's a very relative term for morality in this case. The bad is Angel Eyes. His is very fitting. He's super cold-blooded, really ruthless. And the ugly is Tuco, who might be the most interesting character in the movie because he's super selfish, but he ranges all over the place from trying to charm people to threaten them. He's just extremely self-serving and very willing to throw away his pride to get what he wants or feels like he needs or deserves. It's also interesting because there is no romance element in this movie. It's just three dudes who want a bag of fucking money, which you don't even find out for about an hour in. I would say there are a couple pretty big plot contrivances early on, particularly revolving around Blondie or Clint Eastwood to keep him alive and get the movie going. There's also a couple really weird edits, and I don't know if they're deliberate or fuck-ups or just a low-budget thing that just kind of happened. It's not really clear to me. But they're both near the end of the movie. One of these is when Tuco and Blondie are walking together. The Union soldiers come get them, and it pans over, and their entire base is there. It's a really weird thing, and I don't know if that's just a stylistic thing or a fuck-up. The other one is when it pans over from the Civil War battle. Blondie is shooting at Tuco with a cannon, and the graveyard they're looking for is just right there, like just outside of cannon range. And there's some other little funky stuff too, like where Tuco finally gets the treasure, and then the camera zooms out and there's a noose hanging there, as if he wouldn't have seen Blondie go set this up and had been there the whole time. But nothing huge, just a couple little weird things there. Just to give a quick plot synopsis. Blondie and Tuco work together because he has bounties out on him. They go to collect, and Blondie shoots the ropes to free him so they can split the money. Eventually, Tuco gets on his nerves, so he leaves him in the middle of the desert. And then Tuco is on a quest for revenge for Blondie because he survives. Tuco gets the drop on Blondie, marches him into the desert, and right before Blondie can die, a wagon that isn't being driven by anybody gets stopped by Tuco. A guy barely surviving by the name of Bill Carson is barely alive. He gives Tuco the graveyard, but not the gravestone. And then Blondie comes over and gets the gravestone name. So they each have one piece of the puzzle to find this $200,000 buried treasure, which is about $4 million in today's equivalent, according to Google. He finds out on one of his bounty hunts about this treasure, and then he crosses paths with Blondie and Tuco, at which point he gets the graveyard from Tuco and agrees to work with Blondie in Tuco's stead. And then these three are kind of racing for the money, but Blondie decides that he can't get along with Angel Eyes, so he sides with Tuco, who he can't trust but isn't inherently evil. The three finally get there and have a standoff, at which point Blondie kills Angel Eyes and agrees to split the money with Tuco, while also threatening to hang him, but he decides not to, because he's a man of his word, and they split everything 50-50. That's obviously a super brief synopsis for a 3-hour movie. So I want to go through the stuff that I liked in more detail now. For things I like, I think one of my favorite components of this movie is that the title just lays out kind of the defining morality systems for each character. And they're very clear, distinct people that I think all feel really just real. I'll start with Tuco since we get introduced to him first. The way that he's just kind of a survivor, very self-centered. I don't think it's admirable, but I think he might be the most realistic in the sense that I think most people would behave the way that he does in this movie. The way the Wild West is portrayed as historically accurate is its own conversation. But in this movie and many others, it's an essentially lawless region where people kind of do what they're capable of and the whole spectrum exists. And obviously criminals at a time before DNA, cameras, blah, 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 an organized, structured society were much harder to catch and got away with a lot more. Tuco is very charming when he thinks it'll benefit him. He's not overly ruthless, but he also is not honorable and kills people as needed to benefit himself. He kind of pays lip service to religion. This is something that's pretty common in a lot of mobster, mafia type movies. You have people that are total degenerates and pieces of shit, but manage to rationalize it with their faith. And you can see this all the time in real life as well, obviously. I think this scene here with the gun store owner pretty much sums up his character, where he's nice to him and he's joking and he's kind of charming but forceful. And then he also robs him just because he can. And the store owner doesn't put up a fight, so he doesn't kill him. He's not cruel to him or torturous, but he takes what he wants. And to me, this just kind of sums up his character throughout the movie. His whole revenge plot on Clint Eastwood / Blondie, I think is also super relatable. Where Blondie's like, you know, it's about 70 miles to town. A guy as strong as you can probably make it. He does the same thing to him, except because Clint Eastwood is a blonde-haired, blue-eyed guy. He struggles with it much more. He shoots his water canteen, so he's dehydrated. He intends to leave him for dead. And that kind of pettiness and just wanting revenge, I think is a superhuman way to behave. And I'm sure you've seen a million movies or shows where a character has a chance to get revenge on a really terrible person, which Blondie is not in this context. But your character won't take revenge because revenge is a bad thing to do. And most of the time you're left feeling a little bit disappointed, like, fuck that guy, get your revenge. So the fact that he's willing to go out of his way to be like this, I think is super relatable, even if not flattering. And the Civil War part, while it did feel kind of random to me as I was watching it, I thought it did lead to one of the more interesting moments between the characters, where they blow up this bridge that no one wants destroyed because they view these young men killing each other as just kind of a waste of life and the waste of the lives of the young men involved and just sort of pointless overall. And it leads to a really good moment between Tuco and Blondie where they decide to blow up the bridge to kind of end the slaughter here in this spot over a stupid bridge. Why don't we tell each other each of our parts of the graveyard so they both know where it is in case one dies? And Tuco does tell the truth, but then he also uses the truth from Blondie to try to run ahead of him and get the gold before he needs to share it with him. Which is very fitting for his character to be kind of honest, but still kind of an asshole. I think Blondie is also pretty relatable in the way that people want to envision themselves, I think, where he is the relative good in this chaotic world. He only kills bad people or people as he needs to. I love the relationship with him and Tuco. It's super funny that he's willing to just let him die because he's annoying. But then when Angel Eyes takes Tuco and tortures him, he doesn't like it. And you see him kind of realize that even if he agrees to work with Angel Eyes, that Angel Eyes is just ruthless. But he's also not stupid and he's not some doe-eyed, naive protagonist. He understands that his value is knowing the grave that they need to get to, so he can't really be shot at. He needs to be taken alive. And he uses that to his advantage for him and Tuco to kill Angel Eyes' men, even though they're outnumbered. And he's willing to work with Tuco as sort of the devil you do know versus the one you don't type deal. Really great to see practical explosions, by the way. But you do see his character where he doesn't like people dying needlessly. He's willing to do something to stop the death, even though he doesn't really have to. But at the same time, when Tuco tries to get one over on him, he shoots at him with the cannon. He's willing to take some pot shots. And leading up to the final standoff, he emptied Tuco's gun overnight so that Tuco couldn't participate in the three-way duel. And he also doesn't write the name on the stone that he says he did, so that even if he dies, they won't know which grave has it. He just seems like a normal, solid dude that I think most people would want to be this character if you're inserting yourself into the movie, as opposed to Tuco, who I think is probably the most realistic, but also very unflattering and befitting of the ugly name given in the title. And at the end, because his character is mostly good, but not stupid and naive and overly forgiving, I really didn't know if he was going to let Tuco live or not. Because he has all the cards. He can tell Tuco to get fucked, leave him to die, hang himself, whatever. But I think saving him in the end does make more sense for his character, especially since he's referred to as the good for the movie. But also just reinforcing that he's a man of his word. And he said in the very beginning that they split everything 50-50. And he keeps that up throughout the whole movie, despite all their petty bullshit in between. I think that's a really nice payoff for his character and the movie to end that way. Angel Eyes had a brutal introduction where he goes for a bounty, kills the guy and his son at the dinner table. And I'm assuming that the opening scene in Glorious Bastards was heavily inspired by this because it felt a lot like it. Obviously, you don't get the performance you get from Christoph Waltz and the dialogue of Tarantino, but it's still a really good intro scene for a character. And he says that he finishes all of his bounties. So as the guy is dying that gives him the money, he wants revenge on the guy that put the bounty on him. So he ends up killing that guy also, even though he doesn't really need to. And right away, you understand how sadistic he is. And it's really interesting because he doesn't have that much screen time compared to the other two. But in all of it, you get how just merciless he is. Even the part where they torture Tuco, they talk about how Tuco has until the song ends. And the obvious implication is that they just make them keep playing until he's done. And I think it's pretty smart, too, to minimize his screen time because he's a cool villain, but I don't know if I'd think of him as super deep, other than the aspect of him and Clint Eastwood being opposites, and essentially their relationship is irreconcilable to where Blondie understands that one of them has to go. And Lee Van Cleef, who plays Angel Eyes, also has a really bird-like face. It gives him a very predatory look, and all of that I think just plays into how cool he is. And obviously you get a really great payoff with the three-way kind of Mexican standoff. And it's interesting afterward knowing that he kind of gets outplayed here because Blondie knows he only has to shoot him while he has to worry about both of them. And overall, it's just a really fun story. You essentially got three different personality types, two of them being polar opposites, on a race for treasure. Great, straightforward, simple plot. And the deviations that they take were pretty built up throughout the movie. Obviously, the first third, you have them kind of going back and forth for revenge. The second act, they're figuring out who they want to work with. And the third act, they're getting close to the treasure. They get sidelined by the Civil War for a little bit, but it's been referred to and talked about and part of the whole movie. So I think it works knowing the context of it. And I thought all three of the main characters gave really good performances despite the dub. Clint Eastwood definitely pulls off just being really cool, which is tough, even though it sounds stupid. Because I think if you try to be cool and you're not, it just comes off as cringe. I think Cillian Murphy in Peaky Blinders and Timothy Olyphant in Justified also kind of nail this. Timothy Olyphant seems pretty Clint Eastwood inspired in that show. I'm a little bit embarrassed that it took me so long to watch this because obviously I've heard of it, I've heard the music, just never sat down and took the time to watch it. But I'm glad that I did. It was a good pick from Jay. It was a really good movie. And I can kind of see why Filthy Casual Senior might be a bit of a closeted homo for Clint Eastwood. But I'm going to leave it there for this one. If you've seen the movie, let me know what you think. If you haven't, I'd highly, highly recommend it. I try to respond to the comments that aren't just insults, like and subscribe and all that shit. Thanks. See ya.